thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Can you comment on the drones that are flying around New Jersey reports? It seems like the American people have a big disconnect.
The government knows what is happening.
Breaking news. Mysterious drones have been spotted over New York and New Jersey, and on Friday, Governor Kathy Hochul even closed the airspace over Stewart
there say that they're still not getting answers on where exactly these objects are coming from, or who is controlling them, or where they're going.
Across the Northeast, and now drones reported near an airbase in Ohio, an airport outside New York City, and the arrests involving a drone near Boston's Logan Airport. Tonight, the FBI and Homeland Security.
The War of the Worlds has begun. If you live on the East Coast, you know because you are on the front lines of this battleground. Because boy howdy, you are getting terrorized by these little UFOs every single night. Now, I don't think that this is little green men flying around waiting to pick some of us up and probe our butts, but hey, if our alien overlords are listening, I will sacrifice myself for the sake of science, so you have a willing volunteer right here. But the reason I find all of this so fascinating, and I always keep my finger on the pulse of anything UFO related, is because I feel like here on Earth, almost everything is pretty much knowable to the average person. If you want to put the time and effort and energy, you can figure out anything, whether it be math or science or anything. I always think about Ted Slauson, I think his name was, who he cracked Price is Right. It didn't matter if it was a bikini, a Buick, or a barbecue. This guy could tell you the exact dollar amount on it. Literally broke the game, Price is Right, because that's what he wanted to spend his time doing. And the cool thing about thinking about space and UFOs and just the size of the cosmos is that that is an area where we just don't know. And so instead of the only thing holding you back is how much time you have to dedicate to learn something, the only thing holding you back from having some really good time speculating about what's out there is your own imagination. And I have a rather big imagination, and so it always fascinates me to think about the size of the cosmos and have we been visited by our alien overlords and anything like that. I find absolutely intriguing. Now, there are some people here on planet Earth that sadly don't have an opportunity to enjoy in speculating about what's out there, don't get to have an imagination at all, because their thinking and what the facts that they consume are prescribed to them by an organization. They are not able to think for themselves because, unfortunately, they were baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I find this in particular interesting because I kind of thought, what if we did discover life outside of planet Earth, and would that completely destroy the Jehovah's Witness theology? So let's talk about it. Now, first off, I have to give a little bit of background, just because it's funny, lore-wise with Wally, and how I thought about this while I was a fully believing Jehovah's Witness, because it wasn't something I could go around and talk about, because it potentially went against the overall teachings of the organization. So when me and my brother would have some beers and play some Smash Brothers or watch a basketball game, sometimes we would like to cook up some hypotheses about why the universe was just so dang big. And we floated the idea that it's not completely implausible for a separate Adam and Eve's to have been on other planets out there. So maybe this is not the only planet with intelligent life, because when you think about the scale of the cosmos, it just seems mathematically probable that there are other beings out there, especially if the universe does have a creator. Then the sheer size of it just doesn't make any sense at a certain point. So we're like, well, surely maybe it's one per galaxy. Who really can say. But our basic thought process was, if there are these other places where there is an Adam and Eve, and maybe some of them didn't rebel and they were able to live perfect and their civilization is just going on all la-di-da-di, but only the ones that attained this perfection were able to do any sort of interstellar travel, visit the other places that also had perfect life on them. And so maybe when we as Jehovah's Witnesses finally got our reward and were made perfect and closer to God's image, he would give us the ability to fold space-time so that way we could build and travel through wormholes and eventually visit other planets where there was intelligent life, whether it be people that look like bananas or squirrel men. This is just sounding like a Fortnite lobby, but anyway, this is kind of how my thought process was even as a Jehovah's Witness. Again, nothing I ever talked about to other people or promoted, but I just could never really fully get my head around that Adam and Eve are the only two people that God creates, and yet he creates this vast cosmos that is unimaginably large, that is filled with absolutely nothing. So what do the Jehovah's Witnesses have to say about extraterrestrial life? Well, you might be surprised to find out that they do in fact teach that alien life outside of planet Earth does exist. And they go even a step farther by saying that we have had contact with such alien life. So let's look at this article from April 8th, 1990, where it is talking about, is there life beyond Earth? And the first part of it is essentially to create doubt. Is there anyone out there? And bringing up extraterrestrials, the age-old dream. But it has these little sections in there. Are scientists on solid ground when they assert that the universe is teeming with populated worlds? And this is where the doubts really start to begin. So during all of mankind's search for extraterrestrial life, we haven't really found any decent good evidence. But then they want to go on and explain how the Bible does answers by saying, according to the Bible, extraterrestrial life not only exists, but exists in abundance. It is more complex, more interesting, and more believable than anything that evolutionists, science fiction writers, and movie makers have dreamed up. After all, an extraterrestrial is simply a being who originates outside this Earth and its atmosphere. Scientists wonder if there might be life forms beyond our ability to detect. The Bible assures us that such beings do exist, but they are not the products of evolution. Like all life in the universe in whatever form, they came from the source of life, Jehovah God. He is a spirit being, and he has created myriads of other spirit beings of different types. Angels, cherubs, and seraphs. They perform different work and functions in his intricate heavenly organization. What about life on other planets? Some influential religious figures have insisted that God would not create any world without purpose, and that all inhabitable worlds must therefore be inhabited. Is that what the Bible says? No. The Bible indicates that it is very unlikely that God at this point has created intelligent physical creatures on any planets other than our own. How so? If God created such beings, he did so before he created Adam and Eve. Such beings either remained faithful to their creator or, like Adam and Eve, they sinned and fell into imperfection. But if they became imperfect, they needed a redeemer. One essayist put it, one has this dreadful thought that on Friday, the day Jesus was executed, every Friday, somewhere in the universe, Jesus is being hanged high for someone's sins. But that is not scriptural. The Bible tells us that Jesus died with reference to sin once for all time. What if these beings had remained perfect? Well, when Adam and Eve sinned, they were in effect questioning God's right to rule over a world of intelligent physical beings. If another planet existed at that time, a world full of intelligent beings who were living harmoniously and loyally under God's rule, would they not have been called as witnesses to testify that God's rule does indeed work? This conclusion seems inescapable, since he has already used even imperfect humans as witnesses in his behalf on that very issue. Does that mean that God created all those countless millions of suns, planets, and planets if they do exist, For no purpose? Not at all. While we know, considering the uniqueness of Jesus Christ, that the Earth is not only an inhabited planet in the universe right now, and while we know too that it will forever stand unique as the planet where the Creator vindicated the rightfulness of his rulership, what the future holds we do not know. Now I find it absolutely adorable that they're like, yeah, aliens do exist. You know, there's cherubs and seraphs and all the other angels that God created. It's a really goofy and kind of cute way of looking at it. Now, in Jehovah's Witness lore, if you go even a little bit farther back, they actually really lean into this as an explanation for why people have encountered supposed UFOs in the past. So this is a 1967 Watchtower that was talking about, are there intelligent creatures? And in one paragraph, it mentions this. Hence, there is indeed substance to the legends that some scientists have interpreted as perhaps indicating visitations from outer space. There actually were Earth visits by intelligent, non-human creatures of immense powers. No, these were not organisms from other planets who had evolved greater intelligence than man, as some scientists may suppose, but they were obedient, angelic creations of God. When the deluge came, these superior creatures were able to escape by again taking on spirit form. Although restrained by God since then from materializing as humans, these lawless persons are working from their base in the invisible realm in the vicinity of the earth to bring the human family to ruin. My oh my, what a wangled web we've weaved here with Jehovah's Witness theology. It is kind of sad, and this was born when I was only, a few months. Our first article in 1990 was written when I was only a few months old, so I had never seen it before. But how they talked about this idea that I had of, well, maybe there's these other Adam and Eves out there, and, trying to find a cool way to think about it. But no, they want to have this heliocentric way of looking at the world. No, Earth is where God's name is going to be righteously vindicated. Jesus died for our sins, and not for the sins of Gazorp from, Parsmanian 215 or anything like that. So this is a very boring way of looking at the world, but Jehovah's Witnesses have a very unimaginative, boring way of looking at just about everything in the world. Now, I wanted to take a look and see what other Christians had to say about what if there were a discovery of intelligent life outside of Earth, and would that completely destroy their faith? Because from what I can see here, effectively Jehovah's Witnesses have leaned into this idea that, hey, there is not the definitive answer from Jesus Christ, from God himself and his written word, is that there ain't nobody out there. Why is the universe so big? We don't really know. So any discovery of an intelligent life outside of Earth would absolutely crumble everything that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach. They would have to rework everything, but it would be as a reaction. Now, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses are always coming up with new light that is reactionary, but not always. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let's just take a quick look at what other Christian groups say about intelligent life outside of Earth and what that does to their faith. Now, of course, there's not going to be a total universal agreement amongst Christians and what they think about this subject, but from what I could tell, the ones that were talking about this had basically this kind of a concept, and that is everything is fairly relative. So the Bible we have to look at from a relative perspective. And so the people writing the Bible, an alien to them could have been someone from the Americas. That was an alien concept to them. A kangaroo or a penguin would have been an alien concept to them. Now, the things that they do know are humans are created in God's image, and that is something that is unique to them. So if an alien species was found out there, it wouldn't be uniquely created in God's image. It might be just like discovering a new animal that is from a continent that we had never seen before. It's like the same as discovering something in the Amazon rainforest. Oh wow, we found a new species of beetle. Yippee-doo! That's not going to crumble my faith. And that's sort of how they thought about or tried to project, if this ever happens, what people would think about it. So humans, mankind, are uniquely created in God's image. Therefore, finding an alien species doesn't really have anything to do with this whole redemption. Now, how do they fit into the paradigm of heaven and hell and all of that stuff? Who really knows? But we know that God is a loving God and he takes care of all of his creation. So whatever he has set up for those guys out there doesn't really concern us too much, but hopefully they find their peace with God. And I find this ultimately pretty all right. You know, why not? If you have to come up with some type of answer, I suppose it is not the worst one out there. Now, I find this whole concept of a scientific discovery that would undermine a religious view a very interesting one, particularly with Jehovah's Witnesses, because they are just so gosh darn stubborn. And as I said at the very beginning, normal people, Christians and non-Christians alike, seem to evolve and adapt with the world around them. And Jehovah's Witnesses have this miserable way of existing where sometimes they just decide to put their fingers in their ears and close their eyes and say la 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 la.
Say your prayers to Jesus over.
It is fascinating how there have been scientific discoveries already that would completely undermine Jehovah's Witness teachings, fundamental ones, and yet they just don't address it. They don't talk about it. They don't think about it. They just
Say your prayers to Jesus over.
So I wanted to talk about a couple of scientific discoveries that have already happened that would completely destroy fundamental Jehovah's Witness teachings. And I guess basically to say that even if aliens came down from planet Earth, somehow, or from the heavens, somehow, some way, Jehovah's Witnesses would find a way to just not believe that it happened. That is the arrogance and the stubbornness of that prescribed worldview that they have. So let's talk about a few scientific discoveries that I find interesting that undermine Jehovah's Witness faith. So I think we should start at the very foundation of the Jehovah's Witness faith, and it is a curious one to say the very least, because these geriatric milk bags have this incessant need to cling to the idea that Adam and Eve were real people.
And he created an amazing variety of living creatures to share the earth with. Why did God put forth so much effort to create this beautiful earth? Because he wanted to give the first human couple, Adam and Eve, a wonderful home. As long as they obeyed God, they and their children would live forever and expand the paradise garden to cover the entire globe.
And if you think about it, how was Satan able to entrap the perfect woman Eve? He entrapped her in greed. He got her to crave, desire what belonged to God alone, see. In effect, he said to her, eating of all the trees of the garden minus one tree is not good enough.
So, Jehovah's original purpose did not include death. It would only be introduced if perfect Adam chose to disobey the clear command about not eating from the specific tree in the garden and become imperfect.
Well, Adam and Eve bypassed a do not enter sign for that very reason, and it didn't turn out so well for them or for their offspring. And sadly, we've inherited the desire to test prohibitions.
So the Jehovah's Witnesses stand with a very niche group of Christians who stubbornly refuse to acknowledge a mountain, a tsunami of evidence to suggest that Adam and Eve could not possibly have been real people that walked the planet 6,000 years ago, and that the Noah's flood was a real thing that happened. They hold these ideas and they simply have been disproven. It is irrefutable to even suggest to hold on to this. I cannot tell you enough at how ridiculous it is for them to hold these ideas. And I'm not necessarily convinced that all Jehovah's Witnesses do believe that Adam and Eve were real people. If you took an anonymous poll of Jehovah's Witnesses and said this will never leak, no one in the congregation, elders will never find out, and you ask them, do you genuinely believe Adam and Eve were real people? I am firmly convinced that you would have over half of them say, no, that is absolutely absurd. There's no possible way. Or even with Noah's flood, I don't think you would find a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that would sit there and defend that the entire globe was engulfed beneath miles of water. It is completely absurd. So anyway, what is the scientific evidence against this? Well, we'll have a little science corner with Wally. I'm no expert here, as I'm not really an expert in anything, just a reasonably well-organized person that is curious about the world around me. So I might get some of this wrong. It might not be perfect, but it'll at least get you started on the right track. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is radiometric dating. And just like an actual clock just pinpoints specific points in time, you can do the exact same thing with relative certainty with radioactive materials. So in order to do this, a geologist would have to find a radioactive material, say uranium or potassium, or most commonly carbon, as a reliable source of dating things with radioactive decay. So how do they do this measuring of radioactive decay? Well, we all know that we're made up of atoms. Hopefully we all know this. Yeah, I would hope we're at least that far along. Anyway, and these atoms are made up of three basic building blocks: neutrons, protons, and electrons. So if you look at the periodic table, every specific thing on there is going to have a fixed number of protons, and it can have a variation on how many neutrons and electrons are in any given chemical element. Now, what do we call those variations that have different numbers of neutrons or electrons? We call those isotopes. So an isotope will have a fixed number of protons, and then it will have a different number of neutrons. So for instance, carbon has 6 protons, and it can have 6, 7, or even 8 neutrons. And so those different types are known as isotopes. So you can have carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14. To get that number, we just have the sum total of the protons and the neutrons. So how do you go about measuring? How does this help you measure something and when it happened in time? Well, not all isotopes are built the exact same, you might say. Some are stable, like carbon 12, but carbon 14 isn't stable. It is radioactive. Now, the universe has a way of leveling itself out. Say you fart in a room. When you initially fart, it's going to be super stinky and smelly. And then after a little bit goes by, you can hardly notice because everything has taken an even smell between what it was and the fart entering, and then eventually it dissipates completely. Well, it's kind of like radioactive decay. I know it's not the greatest illustration, but it's the first thing that popped in my head. So what are we going to do about it? So essentially what happens is a radioactive isotope, say carbon 14, wants to over time eventually become a stable isotope in carbon 12. And we can measure how long this takes. So we get a radioactive sample of any organic material. Let's just say it's bones or wood or teeth. I suppose you could do this with different elements from other geological minerals and things like that, but we won't bog you down too much with too much information here. We'll just stick to the basics. Anyway, so when you take this radioactive sample, you look at the parent isotopes, which are the stable. The parent isotopes, are those the stable ones? I can't remember. Which are the stable ones? There's called the parent and the daughter isotopes. Well, anyway, you look at the correlation between these two. You have the stable ones and how many of the isotopes in that radioactive sample have converted from carbon 14 to carbon 12. And because we know that this process in the half-life, as it's called, takes about 5,000 years, we can look at any given radioactive sample and use that to date something. Now, obviously, carbon-14 isn't the only one, but this is a very common one. And we can take a sample from if it has other radioactive elements in it, and they can even give us a spectrum much farther back in time. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years. Now, there is some variance here, but it gets you at least reasonably close at telling just how old something is. And what we know from this is that it is simply impossible that Adam and Eve were the first humans. How do we know that? Well, because we have recovered at different sites around the world thousands of examples, from skulls to teeth, which again, if it's an organic material, you can apply the science to it. And we know that these are hundreds of thousands of years old. Science be sciencing, math be mathing. There were humanoids, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, or Homo erectus, walking around hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we know this so precisely, we can even track their movements on a map. We can see how they migrated out of Africa, and we can see how they started intermingling with other humanoids, the Neanderthals, that were already present in parts of Europe and Asia. And we can even know that they started having sex. Now, how do we know that they started having sex? Well, there is a second line of evidence that we can look at that bolsters this entire concept, and that is genetic evidence. Francis Collins was the director of the Human Genome Project, and he is an evangelical Christian. And he himself, after mapping the human genome and looking at genetic evidence, concluded that it is simply impossible for Adam and Eve to have been our first human parents, because we share genetic code with every other living thing on the planet. And he says, hey, we can still have faith in God, we can still be Christians, but this idea of an Adam and Eve is demonstrably silly and very childlike, if we're going to look at the world that way. So how does this work? Again, I'm no geneticist here, but humans, we have DNA that helps code our actions and our attributes, right? And in that, we have like 3 million base pairs. 3 billion base pairs of DNA. Now, with each generation, it's not copied exactly the same. So you have that 3 billion base pairs of genetic markers in your DNA. And with each generation, you lose about 70. And so you can go back to your grandparents and, so you are 140 differences between your DNA and their DNA. Your great-grandparents, you have 210 variances and differences between your DNA and their DNA. And we can go all the way back with looking at the DNA that we found in some of the skulls and teeth in those examples of early humanoids, and we've actually extracted DNA from that. And guess what? When you look at the timing of these generations and how far back they would go, and you calculate that with how we also look at radiometric dating, guess what? They agree with each other. We have this thing built inside of us. You can look at someone's genetic code and predict how far back that your ancestors started having sex with Neanderthals. And then we can go and dig up the bones of Neanderthals, and we can look at what level, what spot they were in any given archaeological dig, and we can predict when that happened, and that's correct. And on top of that, we can use radiometric dating, and it agrees with that. So we have the geology agrees with it, your genes agree with it, and our radiometric dating, and they all come together and agree on this. It is simply irrefutable evidence that Adam and Eve could not exist. And this research is not by any means new, but I would say since I've become aware and see what goes on in science circles, and I kind of follow it, even when I was a Jehovah's Witness, there begins a point when you start understanding these concepts where you say, hey guys, Adam and Eve is impossible. You have to look at this and come up with something. If you are a Jehovah's Witness and you are part of like their leadership, you would at least have to say, okay, we got to address the elephant in the room. But incredibly, they just don't. They don't update their teachings. They stubbornly hold on to the idea that Adam and Eve were real people because it sets them apart as Christians. They think that people aren't going to go to heaven, but they're going to inherit the earth. And who was originally intended to be on the earth? Well, that was Adam and Eve. So that was God's original plan. Therefore, Adam and Eve has to be a real historic people for Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs to be to make any sense. So I would like to think that something like aliens would completely disrupt the Jehovah's Witness world. They would just blow their minds. They wouldn't even be able to handle it. But the more and more I thought about it, I realized that we already have seen scientific discoveries that fundamentally destroy the Jehovah's Witness belief system. And yet, here we are, 2024 years after the birth of our Lord and Savior, Christ, and they are still holding on to these ancient beliefs. It is insane how stubborn they are and how they will absolutely refuse to look at evidence. They'll get a glazed look over in their face and say, oh, that's a bunch of science talk. I don't know about all that, but sin, Bible, governing body, I trust that. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting concept because on one hand, yes, it would undermine their belief system, but at the same time, they might just carry on believing like always. Even if War of the Worlds happened, aliens started attacking, Jehovah's Witnesses would be like, yep, this is fine. This is exactly what we would have expected with our doctrine. Or they would just say, those aliens aren't real. That's just fake news. Anyway, that's about all I got for you today. Hopefully all of that yapping made some sense. If you guys enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like on the video. I very much appreciate it, and it helps it get out to more people on YouTube. With that being said, stay safe, be kind, and don't forget to show yourself the same kindness that you show to others. And you better have a good-ass day. I brought ZZ back again, so I hope you guys are happy.